is not that hard to find. I will praise you on the mountain, and I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are, so I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands and the heartache all the same. How far beneath your glory does your kindness extend? The path from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinners past. And oh, how fast would you come running if just to shadow me through the night, trace my steps through all my failure, and walk me out the other side. For who could dare ascend that mountain, that valleyed hill called Calvary, but for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. I will praise you on the mountain, and I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are, so I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands and the heartache all the same. Wherever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, and if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent. Whatever I walk through, whatever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, and if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent, my song of ascent. We sing out our song of ascent. And from the gravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upwards from a deep but empty grave. I will praise you on the mountain, and I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands, in the heart. let it go the same.
Thanks, brother. Yeah. Homeboy made it, huh? Dude was in the thickets by the Jordan. Oh. And when we got the call, we were dropping our daughter off at school on the East Coast. And we got a call from Susie, or a text, and she said, pray for Ed, because it's gnarly. And so we did. We prayed on the whole airplane ride, and just that whole ride home, 5 hours and 45 minutes from New York to San Diego, I just was reflecting on who our people are. And your people are those people who, like, even when you get into stuff, you just default back to family. And that's how we feel about the Nobles. I think it was probably 21 years to the weekend that we started together. Year 2000, September, I think it was the first week in September. Isn't that weird? So I think that's just the Lord embossing, yo, it's about people. And in fact, I was thinking about this morning. This has a little bit derivative conceptualization to what I'm talking about this morning. But like, if you go in-depthly on worship in the Bible, what it actually looks like is community. Like Philippians 2, after he talks about how Jesus, which we're going to talk about, after he talks about Jesus emptying himself of his God card, Paul says, be like this to each other. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So we're going to talk about worship because Nolan asked me to talk a little bit about worship, and I've been doing worship even before Journey, and then I did it at Lake Avenue in Pasadena, California, and I was leading for high school students, and I knew, like, that was the first gig, right? And so I knew more acutely now than I knew then, what it's like to just kind of be in a moment and look up and see yawns. People just kind of like, what are we doing? Why are we singing? You know, and so worship has been not only something that I've thought a lot about and something that I've studied a lot, but it's been something that I've sought to become a practitioner of. And what I've discovered is that this is a microcosm of worship. What we're doing here when you're singing is a microcosm, it's a little picture, it's a little universe of what we're gonna talk about true worship is. Can I get a witness? So we're gonna jump right in because this is the words. What's the actual official title? I'm sorry, the official title of the series. These words have changed my life. And partially because, well, I'll get into that. Romans 12:1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. I love this. And part of what I love about it is that it points me immediately. Like when you read that, you're like, what does he mean? Paul wrote another letter. He wrote a letter not just to the Romans, but to the Philippians. And in that, he kind of describes what it means to offer your body as a living sacrifice because he looks at Jesus. See, like, we often talk about Jesus as the one who came to give us this beautiful picture of who God is, right? And he was and he is a beautiful picture of who God is. But he's also, historically and theologically, the picture of who you were supposed to be. He's the picture of the true Adam. And so when we look at the life of Jesus, we get a picture of what it means to be truly a worshiper. And Philippians 2 is that picture. So in order to know how to offer our bodies, perhaps we should look at the prototype, Jesus being the prototype. Philippians 2, 5 through 8. Let me read it for you. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross, a humiliating, excruciating invention of the Romans. This, I believe, is a picture of true worship. And the fundamental, central conceptualization you see Paul putting forward to the Philippians is this: worship is a dispensing. Worship is a pouring out. If you want to see what worship looks like, it looks like, and we're going to go into three things that this emptying, the key action of worship looks like, okay? Jesus emptied himself in this passage of three things that he's inviting you and I in these moments, the microcosm, but also in your life in general, to dispense yourself of. Because in those moments, God will be lifted up. God will be glorified, and you, hear this, will shift environments. The corner on which our warehouse and coffee shop and kind of market was in East Village, and it got shut down because we were worshiping too loud. But I'll tell you, that corner's environment shifted. Not just because we were singing songs on the weekend. I believe that was part of it. But also because we were living lives that were emptying themselves of these three things. And I want to invite you, my brothers and sisters, many of whom know this already. So I'm just going to underline, I'm going to emboss. But some of you, this might be fresh. And I'm inviting you into a new way of being. Following Jesus. Into what it truly means to be human. Okay? The first thing he emptied himself of is self-sufficiency. Look at in verse 6. Who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. You see this in John 5:19. Jesus had this relationship with the Father, and you could see it in his day-to-day life where he would be like, I wonder what the Father wants to do. Like, he's God, but he's deferred that godness to show us what it means to be human. And so Jesus lived prayerful. He lived a life that was trying to open itself up and dispense itself of its self-sufficiency so that it could connect with God, to show us what it looks like to live a life in connection with the Father. It says in John 5:19, very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing. Because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. See, this is a beautiful picture of what it means to not be self-sufficient. But you and I have only been taught to be self-sufficient. It's literally the definition of being an adult. I think it's the opposite. True adults know how to be interdependent, not just independent. Trip out on this. Here's where our self-sufficiency is getting us. 37 of 38 U.S. jurisdictions with available synthetic opioid data reported increases in synthetic opioid-involved overdose deaths. 18 of these jurisdictions reported increases greater than 50% during COVID. 10 Western states reported over a 98% increase in synthetic opioid-involved deaths. Overdose deaths involving cocaine also increased by 26.5%. We are managing life on our own, and we are failing miserably. What you give to weed, you don't give to God. What you give to pornography, you don't give to him. We've been taught to be independent, but we have not been taught to live according to our blueprint as humans, which is to be interdependent. It's so interesting to me that the drug treatment locations around the world that are working, first step, integrate with a higher power and integrate with others. get connected to a higher power, and get connected to others. That's what works. You see, the opposite of addiction is not non-addiction, it's worship. And worship looks like community. Jesus emptied himself of his own self-sufficiency so he could fill up in the sufficiency of God. So what if life seems so unbearable? Some of you came in here with heavy loads. You know, I just dropped my daughter off. That's weird. I feel that right now. Very existential. Some of you have these heavy loads, but I want to just ask you, what if life seems so unbearable because you were never meant to have the universe on your shoulders? You're not God. Pour out the self-sufficiency. I tell you, when you're here in worship and you're singing songs that say, God, I can't, but you can, you're all sufficient, let it go. Let that sufficiency go. And it will here's what happens because you're pouring out. See, listen, you are a vessel. I mean, you're filled with 80% water. You're a jug of water. I mean, there's the governing analogy. I mean, just pour yourself out because you were made to be filled. But you were made to be filled with something other than your own bootstrap philosophy, your own wherewithal. It's failing you. You suck at being God. Isn't it interesting that Jesus did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but in Genesis 3, you and I did. Genesis 3, we considered equality with God something to be taken and eaten. But Jesus, showing us what it means to be truly human, said, no, I have no idea. He did have an idea, but he was showing you and I how to do life. The last 4 years have taught us to rely on God next level. We stepped into things unseen. Let me just tell you, anxiety is the tune of your self-sufficiency. In contrast, when that anxiety would hit us, and it would hit us every Sunday, we were in what you would call a post-Christian neighborhood, and we still are. And there was always warfare. And I would feel depressed, I would feel anxious, I would feel, I would beat myself up. And so my wife and I started going on long prayer walks on Sunday mornings because our services were at 5 p.m. And then we would also worship. We'd put worship music on in the house. And that shifted things. We began to just dispense of our self-sufficiency, and God filled us up with his. Let me just tell you this real quick, and this is just kind of an addition. God wants to raise your ceiling. You see, your self-sufficiency will get you to race with people, but will it get you to race with horses? See, that's what God says to Jeremiah. He says, if you have raced with men on foot and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses? If you stumble in safe country, how will you manage the thickets by the Jordan? If you want to see your true potential as a human, it's got to be you plus God. And that means you have to dispense of your self-sufficiency. The second thing Jesus dispenses of is self-importance. And this is perhaps the archetypal picture of worship. I love how Paul puts it in verse 7. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. He made himself nothing. He humbled himself to be a servant. The best picture of this is John 13, where he takes off his outer garment, which was humiliating, gets down on his knees, and he washes his disciples' feet. This is Jesus showing us what it means to dispense of the self-importance. On 3 occasions, completely not connected, probably divided by months of time, 3 different occasions, 3 guys came to our warehouse while we were rehearsing a song called So Will I. And it's a song about the gospel. These guys were not believers in Jesus. They were very put together. They were very well-dressed. The cologne smelled great. And every time, they were standing at our door crying. And most of them were European. I don't know what that was about. So I went up to these guys because I'm like, what are you doing at our door, bro? Because usually we would have people trying to come in and pee and stuff. It was weird. So I went up to these guys and I said, hey, you okay? And they said this. And I'm generalizing, but all of them kind of said this. What is this song? They've been trying so hard to be important. I could tell by their countenance. I could tell by their clothes. I could tell by their smell. They were important people. East Village is full of important people who pay lots of money for their apartment and drive a Benz. And so self-importance is at a height there. And so interesting, though, because there's this contrast with people who make less than $15,000 a year there. And so you have these really self-important people, and then you have these people living on the streets who are this picture of human brokenness. And so you see the contrast, but as I was standing with these guys, I felt this, that they wanted to get rid of the self-importance. They knew they couldn't hang. They knew that something was bigger than them. And this song was pointing to the bigger thing. The best pictures of this is like, you know the picture of the woman coming into the room where Jesus is, and she wets his feet with her bottle of perfume that's worth a lot of money. And her tears are mingled with the perfume, and she starts washing his feet with her hair. She gets humiliated, and people tell her to get out of here. But he's just so important. In those moments of worship on Sunday mornings or Friday nights where you say, God, you are the first and the last, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. You're saying, I'm not. And you're making room for the one who measures the universe with the palm of his hand. Can I get a witness? That's when your life begins to get crazy. But see, we're practical atheists because we leave the room and we try to do life on our own again. But you can't. You're not good enough at being God. So stop. Stop trying. I'm trying to take a load off you. You felt it this morning. There are things in this room that are heavy that I'm inviting you to let go of. Jesus emptied himself of the status so he could fill up in the Father's vision for planet Earth. And see, that's what happens. Who knew that when David took off his clothes and started dancing before the Ark of the Covenant, that was God's vision for planet Earth? He was humiliating to his wife as she watched him dance. How ridiculous. He was declaring, there's one to whom every knee shall bow. There's one to whom every tongue will confess. Man, that's a beautiful picture of a life. But it looks ridiculous to people who are trying to be self-important. Jesus is emptying himself, becomes an example for us in what it means to be truly human. So here's how it works. If pride comes before the fall, then humility precedes the dawning of our true potential. See, because when you dispense of trying to be God, you dispense of your posturing as all together. In that moment of humility and in that moment of vulnerability, whether it be here or in front of your spouse or in a small group of believers, something happens. That's when, in that dispensing, God fills you up with heaven. He fills you up with his resource. If you want to see pictures of this, just look historically through people who have lived surrendered lives. When you dispense of your lording over tendencies at home, the people in your family will fill up in the presence and power of God. When you pour out your pride and do something beneath you for one of your employees, that moment will be filled up with the presence and power of God, and chances are that person will be with you forever. This is worship. Every time you do something beneath you, you are actually being very godly. When you dispense of the rat race and self-importance, and you play with your kid all day when you could be getting ahead at work, the presence and power of God is worshiped, and he will inhabit that space. When you humble yourself in an argument that you are sure you can and maybe already have won, and instead you serve the other by listening and only seeking to understand, you are worshiping. And that moment is filled with the presence and power of God. The last thing Jesus dispenses of is self-preservation. It says in verse 8, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. See, Jesus emptied himself of self-preservation so he could fill up in the surprising deliverance of God. See, some of you are like, I've never been delivered by God. You got to stop trying to self-preserve. God's like, I want to get in there. I want to help you. But your life is so muddled and cluttered and filled up with your own self-preservation. And he's saying, will you step out? See, true worship always looks a little reckless. It always is taking into consideration something else, another power that intervenes in a moment of helplessness and hopelessness. Historically, when a person is caught up in the truest worship, they do not self-preserve, but give freely of their body. Christ on the cross, the Apostle Paul in his shipwrecks and beatings amidst a life of worship, Francis of Assisi with the embrace of a leper that once repulsed him, even the generosity and hospitality that you experience at some of your friends' houses. Like some of you, you go to your friend's house and they just throw their whole body. It's like they're sacrificing their body for this moment of a party. And it's a good party because this person is holding nothing back. And there's laughter and there's connection and there's amazing food, all because it got poured out. There was not a sense that I need to preserve and hold back. There was a sense in which, no, today we pour out. This is worship. This always feels like worship. Perhaps the most stark example of worship is the martyrs. And there was a martyrdom in 177 AD in a town called Lyon. And a servant girl by the name of Blandina stuck out from the rest. Many people were put to death because of their faith that day. They took them to the arena and they ran them through with spears and swords. But Blandina stuck out. And Tom Holland in his book, Dominion, which is a good book, you should read it, says this about that moment. In the arena, so it was reported to the churches of Asia, Blandina's broken body had seemed transfigured. Her fellow martyrs, in the midst of their own agonies, had looked upon their sister and seen in her the person, the one who was crucified for them. You see, when we give our lives, when we give our bodies, when we go to the nth degree, it brings to mind Christ. For the people around you, it is a picture of Christ. It's worship. When we pour out our body's energies to God, it becomes witness to his power and love on earth. I think this even goes for sports. There was a runner by the name of Eric Liddell. He grew up in China. He was the son of missionaries. And the movie Chariots of Fire has him in it. Well, there's an actor playing him. And Eric Liddell, there's this famous quote from the movie. It says, when I run, I feel God's pleasure. I love that, man. When you pour yourself out, the pleasure of God is on that moment because you were given this thing to give. You were given the resources in this thing to pour out so that God can say, are you empty? Finally, I get to fill you up. So whether it be a craft or whether you're on the gridiron or whether you're just gonna go for a run tomorrow, pour it out. That's worship. And you know what? It comes back to you. There are dividends you don't even yet see. I think if we live these lives of dispensing of self-preservation and self-importance, And I always forget the first one. I'm so far down the road. Self-sufficiency. When we dispense of these things, when we say, God, I'm not sufficient, I need you. And then when we go to the self-importance one and we say, God, you are first and last, I'm not. And then we don't preserve ourselves and we say, God, here I am, send me, like Isaiah said. Something happens. But that passage in Romans 12:1, it has a phrase that we haven't talked about yet. And he says this. He says, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. So we need a view of God's mercy. And I know no better view of God's mercy than the Eucharist. Communion, where Jesus took a bread and he said, this is my body and it's going to get broken for you. And then he took wine and he said, this is my blood shed for you for the forgiveness of sins. This is a picture of God's mercy. I don't know if we do it enough. I know somebody who carries around a little package like you're going to get today, and when they feel angry at a brother or a sister, they take communion. In view of God's mercy, we do all of these things. So,
I could run 1,000 miles to win the race of life, but what's the value without you? And I could write 1,000 songs to captivate your heart, but more than all friends, Lord, you seek the depths of me. When you see me, you see my heart in the light of your mercy, through the eyes of your Son. You love me with open arms, through the pride of a Father. I was once a prodigal, burdened by my shame, till you came running to remind me your love is unconditional, and in your eyes I'm worthy of forgiveness. What was lost is now redeemed. When you see me, you see my heart, through the eyes of your mercy, in the light of your Son. You love me with open arms, in the pride of a Father. Who am I that you love me? Who am I that you save my soul? Who am I without you, Lord? And who am I to be worthy? Who am I that you're mindful of me? Who am I that you call me yours? And who am I that you love me? the pride of a father. You are my fire. When the world falls away, I am a heart sea that only breaks open from a flame. You are my woven sky, and the artist with clay. I know every delight is you who spoke my name and breathed me out. And then you held me close, and then you never left my side. You, my God. We sing, Father, would you call the seas to still? May my thoughts align themselves with yours again. Abba, Father, through your word you broke our sin. Lift our voices to exalt the one who all my pain lies at the feet of your amazing grace. The rhythms of your love are like a current. The waters that I walk through you are versed with, and you are rest in fields of green, sat beside quiet streams. You restore my soul, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord. We sing, Father, would you call the seas to still? May my thoughts align themselves with yours again. Abba, Father, through your word you broke our sin. Lift our voices to exalt the one who lived. I wait until you call me forth. hands. What a worthy Father, what a mighty King. We sing, Father, would you call the seas to still? May my thoughts align themselves with yours again. Abba, Father, through your word you broke our sin. Lift our voices to exalt the one who lives.